Now, I'm sure you've all heard a story that is just too perfect to be true. Here's something most people never really think about. The truth is usually messy. Real memories are imperfect. People forget details, they correct themselves, they jump backwards. Pause, change direction. Now, that's normal. That's human. But deceptive stories, a little bit different. Sometimes they sound almost too perfect, too polished, or too smooth, too rehearsed. And that's why investigators separate people when they're interviewing two people who they think may be involved in the same crime to see if their stories match. And oddly, that can be a warning sign. Hi, I'm Steve Van Apren, and today we're looking at why some deceptive stories sound suspiciously perfect. But before we start, just a quick disclaimer like normal, no single behaviour proves deception on its own. There are always exemptions, such as stress, trauma, memory limitations, ADHD, neurodivergence, shock, and different communication styles together with a cultural difference. We always look at groups or clusters of behaviours, verbal, non-verbal, paralinguistic, content, structure, and some of the other things I've been talking about, not one isolated sign. And in serious situations, these observations should always be supported by corroborating evidence. All right, let's get into it. Think about your own memory. If I asked you, what did you do last Tuesday? You probably wouldn't deliver a flawless speech. You'd pause, you'd think, maybe correct yourself, say things like, hang on, no, actually, that happened before. That's real memory retrieval, because genuine memories are reconstructed, not replayed like a movie. Now compare that with this. I woke up at exactly 7:03, had breakfast, left at 8:14, arrived at work at 8:46, completed my tasks, returned home, watched television. Perfect, but almost weirdly perfect. Why? Because according to deception researchers like Albert Ridge, fabricated stories are sometimes rehearsed for consistency. We know that. Because if you're inventing something, consistency feels safe. The problem is real human memory rarely behaves neatly. Even truthful people forget harmless details, mixing up timing, self-correcting, adding things later. That's normal. Now, let me be clear. Being organised doesn't mean someone is being deceptive. Some people are highly structured communicators, especially professionals like pilots, lawyers, executives, investigators. But what becomes interesting is when the story feels scripted rather than remembered. Let me show you. Person one says, I think I got there around 8. Actually, maybe 8:15 because traffic was terrible. Person two says, I arrived at exactly 8:14. Now, maybe both are truthful, but one sounds like memory, the other sounds like prepared narrative. Another clue, no spontaneous corrections during the process. Truthful people often fix themselves mid-story because memory retrieval, like I said before, is messy. Fabricated stories, on the other hand, sometimes avoid correction because their storyteller fears inconsistency. And ironically, that creates artificial perfection. Reality monitoring research suggests experienced memories often contain natural imperfection. And it makes sense because life itself is imperfect. Perfect stories can sometimes be performance. Again, this is never proof on its own, but it becomes highly interesting when perfection appears alongside missing sensory detail, over-explaining, emotional mismatch, or timeline inconsistencies, or clear-cut contradictions, because clusters matter. So let's recap. Watch for overly polished storytelling, suspicious exact timelines, lack of corrections, rehearsed delivery, and stories that feel more scripted than remembered. Because sometimes the story that sounds too perfect is trying a little too hard to be believed. Some of the references are Albert Ridge, Detecting Lies and Deceit, Johnson and Ray in Reality Monitoring and Memory Reconstruction Research. If you found this useful, comment truth below, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone you think needs to see it, because once you understand human behaviour, don't just hear what people say, you see what they're trying to hide. I'm Steve Van Apren.